China will impose an additional 34% tariff on all U.S. origin goods, based on the current applicable tariff rates, starting April 10, the Customs Tariff Commission of the State Council announced on Friday, in response to the U.S. reciprocal tariffs against Chinese imports to the U.S. Announced on Wednesday U.S. time, China Media Group reported, the additional tariffs will take effect on April 10. Current bonded and tax reduction policies will remain unchanged, and the new tariffs will not be subject to exemptions, the announcement stated. Goods that are shipped from their place of departure before April 10 and imported between April 10 and May 13 will not be subject to the additional tariffs specified in the announcement. On April 2, 2025, the U.S. government announced the imposition of so-called reciprocal tariffs, including on Chinese goods. The Customs Tariff Commission stated that this move violates international trade rules, harms China's legitimate rights and interests, and exemplifies unilateral bullying. China's retaliatory tariff policy in response to the U.S.'s reciprocal tariffs on Chinese imports, which were announced on April 2, 2025. Let's break it down in detail. 1. What is China doing? China will impose an additional 34% tariff on all U.S. origin goods starting April 10, 2025. This tariff applies on top of the existing tariffs that are already in place. Based on the current applicable tariff rates, this means the 34% tariff will be added to whatever tariff rates are already being applied to U.S. imports. Starting April 10, the tariff increase takes effect from this date. 2. Why is China imposing these tariffs? This is a retaliatory measure against the U.S. government's announcement on April 2, 2025, which imposed so-called reciprocal tariffs on Chinese goods. China views this as a violation of international trade rules. Accuses the U.S. of unilateral bullying, suggesting that the U.S. is unfairly using trade measures to pressure China. Says it harms China's legitimate rights and interests, implying that these tariffs damage Chinese businesses and the economy. 3. Exemptions and special cases. The announcement clarifies that current bonded and tax reduction policies will remain unchanged. This means that goods that already benefit from duty-free zones or special tax reductions won't lose those benefits. The new tariffs will not be subject to exemptions. No businesses or industries will get special treatment to avoid these new tariffs. 4. Shipping and import rules. If goods leave the U.S. before April 10 and arrive in China between April 10 and May 13, they will not be subject to the extra 34% tariff. This gives businesses a brief transition period to adjust their shipments before the full tariff takes effect. 5. Key takeaways. China is responding to U.S. tariffs with its own counter-tariffs. Why China is responding to U.S. tariffs? China is responding to U.S. tariffs for several reasons, primarily to protect its economic interests, assert its sovereignty in trade policy, and counter what it sees as unfair trade practices by the United States. Here's a detailed breakdown of why China is taking this step. 1. Retaliation against U.S. reciprocal tariffs. The U.S. imposed new tariffs on Chinese imports on April 2, 2025, calling them reciprocal tariffs. China sees this as an unfair trade measure and believes it violates international trade rules. To counterbalance the economic impact, China is matching or exceeding the U.S. action with its own tariffs. 2. Economic protectionism. The U.S. tariffs make Chinese goods more expensive in the U.S. market, reducing their competitiveness. By imposing a 34% additional tariff on U.S. goods, China makes American products more expensive in its own market, discouraging Chinese businesses and consumers from buying them. This protects Chinese domestic industries from losing ground to American competitors. 3. political signaling and trade negotiation tactics. Trade wars are not just about economics, they are also about power and negotiation leverage. By retaliating strongly, China sends a message to the US that it will not accept one-sided economic pressure. This increases pressure on the US to reconsider its tariffs and possibly negotiate a settlement. 4. Response to US unilateral bullying. China accuses the US of unilateralism, meaning the US is making decisions without negotiation or global consensus. Imposing counter-tariffs is China's way of asserting its rights in global trade and challenging US dominance in setting trade rules. This aligns with China's broader economic and geopolitical strategy of resisting Western economic coercion. 5. Maintaining domestic stability. If China did not retaliate, it might be seen as weak by domestic businesses and citizens. Chinese manufacturers and farmers rely on government support to ensure fair competition. By imposing counter-tariffs, China reassures its industries that it is protecting their interests. 6. Reducing dependence on US imports. Higher tariffs on US goods encourage Chinese businesses to seek alternative suppliers from Europe, Latin America, or Southeast Asia. Over time, this reduces China's economic reliance on the US, making it less vulnerable to future trade disputes. Let's see how Chinese reacted. Chinese say that at midnight this morning Beijing time, Trump announced his decision on the so-called reciprocal tariffs against the whole world as expected. This time, the firepower is full, and the degree, amplitude, intensity and breadth are all beyond our previous predictions. The reason why it is called full firepower this time is that it is not only aimed at China, but also at some of his allies, such as the EU, which is taxed 20%. There are also some countries that he values very much, such as India and Vietnam, which are taxed 46%. Southeast Asian countries generally impose higher taxes. For example, South Korea is 25%, Japan is 24%, and China is 34%. Don't think that he is only targeting China at 30%. If you add the previous 20%, it has reached more than 50%, and it may even break the 60% mark. This will of course have an impact on the economies of all countries, unless you don't want to do business with the United States, or unless you don't have a major market in the United States. Churchill once said that pessimists see difficulties in hope, and optimists see opportunities in difficulties. So for China this time, is it the former or the latter? I think it should be the latter. Just think about it. When globalization is falling apart, when almost all countries in the world have become countries suppressed by Trump's high tariffs, then aren't these countries consistent with China in their stance on free trade? This is the first one. The second one, I just used 3 stages, the 3 stages of globalization falling apart. The first stage was before the epidemic, before 19, the second stage was during the epidemic, and the third stage is now, this time, starting from today. So what did I feel from a very valuable experience during the epidemic? In fact, economic integration between regions, whether it is the European Union or North America, especially in our East Asia, or the entire Asian region, the space for economic integration is very solid and very broad, and the internal genes are intertwined, but we are due to many political and strategic problems. This kind of integration of our economic genes is hindered, such as China, Japan, South Korea, and India and us. Okay, but now everyone is a victim of the high tariffs of the United States. Then why can't we join together? Can't we hold hands, 5, 10 fingers connected? You see, if you tie your 5 fingers together with the 5 fingers of others, and they become a crisscross relationship, and you want to cut off the 10 fingers of others, it is equivalent to cutting off 5 of your own fingers. The principle is the same. So in this process, there are many calls and demands for free trade between China, Japan, South Korea, China and India, including India and the EU, the EU and Canada, China and the EU, Canada, Australia, and India. So first, our situation is the same, and second, the common situation will inevitably lead to common needs. Common needs will inevitably lead to common strategies, and common strategies will of course lead to common tactics. So from strategy to tactics, we can re-establish rules and regulations, and everyone will come together to keep warm. On the surface, it seems to be trade, but in fact, it will become a strategy behind the scenes. So I agree with this opinion. The biggest winner of this matter is China. Of course, the biggest winner is China, since it has long been said that China needs to design every step well, because we cannot be too blindly optimistic, because there are all kinds of differences between the United States and these countries, and there is only one difference that they have in common, which is the concern about China. So I have repeatedly said that in this situation, we should reduce ideology. We should reduce the appeal for political interests and use economic interests more. Trump is now firing on all cylinders, only for the interests of the United States. If that is the case, China is the same, so if we take away the essence, we see that the logical context is actually the same. If that is the case, Trump makes the United States greater, and at the same time the great rise of the Chinese nation. In this sense, we can really go our separate ways. Some Chinese went on to say that on April 2, 2025, under the spotlight of the Rose Garden of the White House, Trump once again raised his tariff stick. This time the script is called reciprocal tariffs. We will charge other countries as much tax as we charge them. This slogan, which sounds fair and reasonable, is like a depth bomb thrown into the international trade pool, and the ripples it has aroused are spreading around the world. 1. Double standards behind reciprocity. The so-called reciprocal tariff is essentially a complex calculation problem. Officials from the U.S. Treasury Department have to plug the tariffs, value-added taxes, non-tariff barriers, and even exchange rate policies of trading partners into the formula to calculate a comprehensive tax rate. For example, India's average tariff is 5% to 20% higher than that of the United States. According to this algorithm, the tariff on Indian goods exported to the United States may soar directly from 3.3% to 17%. But there is a strange thing here. The United States imposes a 25% tariff on pickup trucks, while the European Union only charges 10%, and Japan simply has zero tariffs. Trump's reciprocity is actually one-sided. I am right if I am right. What's more, this policy only increases taxes but does not reduce them. The U.S. Department of Commerce is almost breaking its abacus on its face. If a country imposes a 30% tax on U.S. beef, the U.S. will impose a 30% tax on the country's cars. But conversely, if the U.S. imposes a 10% tax on a country's steel, but the other country does not impose a U.S. corn tax, the U.S. will not mention tax cuts. This kind of game of only importing and not exporting makes the WTO's most favored nation treatment principle a decoration. Second, the strategic calculation of the drunkard's intention is not the wine. There are 3 steps hidden behind Trump's tariff game. The first is to maintain the hegemony of the US dollar. The US's annual trade deficit of $1.2 trillion is essentially the price of the US dollar as the world currency. But the continued double deficit may shake the status of the US dollar. Trump wants to solve the Triffin dilemma by reducing the deficit and let the US dollar continue to make money. The second is to promote the return of manufacturing. Tax increases are just appetizers. The real goal is to force countries to invest and build factories in the United States. Just like after the tax increase on steel in 2017, Japanese automakers had to run to Ohio to set up factories. This time Trump hopes to use higher tariffs to bring the global industrial chain back to the United States. The last is to establish peace under the American system. Tariffs have become bargaining chips. If India wants to reduce tariffs, it must buy American weapons. South Korea has to renegotiate military expenditure sharing. Canada has even been targeted for Arctic territory. In the future, the United States may bundle trade, finance, and security systems into a big gift package, and let countries pay for the new order of American priority. 3. Dominoes of the global economy. Before the policy is implemented, countries have begun to deploy troops. The European Union has prepared a counterlist, Canada threatens to retaliate, and Mexico wants to protect jobs. But the most worrying thing is the global supply chain. For example, a car may involve parts from 20 countries. The complexity of the rules of origin makes reciprocal tariffs a time bomb. The Peterson Institute in the United States calculates that if it is strictly implemented, global trade costs will surge by 30%, which is equivalent to building another Berlin Wall. For ordinary Americans, this is even more of a disaster. Research at Yale University shows that if other countries retaliate, the US CPI will soar by 2.1%, and the GDP growth rate will drop by 1 percentage point. Auto tariffs may increase the price of each car by $10,000. Retail giant Walmart warns that the price of daily necessities will soon skyrocket. Even more ironic is that American consumers will bear 90% of the tariff costs. Trump's promise of foreign countries paying the bill has become a blank check. The mirror of history is always cruel. The Smoot Profit Tariff Act of 1930 triggered a global trade war, which made the Great Depression worse. Today, S&P has lowered its global growth forecast, and the IMF warned that uncertainty is eroding confidence. If Trump continues to increase the stakes, the global economy may face the worst recession since 1929. 4. Those who play with fire will get burned. Although Trump called April 2nd Liberation Day, the market obviously does not buy it. US stocks have wiped out all gains since the election before the policy was implemented, and the US dollar index fell below the 95 mark. What's more fatal is that American companies are voting with their feet, and giants such as Apple and Tesla are quietly adjusting their supply chains. By transferring part of the production capacity to Southeast Asia, China has shown amazing resilience in this storm, with the RMB exchange rate stabilizing in the 7.2-7.3 range, and Hong Kong stocks rising by more than 30% at the beginning of the year. Economist Ding Shuang pointed out that the average US tariff on China is already 15 percentage points higher, and there is limited room for further tax increases. This confidence comes from China's perfect industrial chain and huge domestic demand market. When the world is paying for Trump's tariff game, the United States itself is also paying the price. Rating agency Moody's warned that a full-scale trade war could cause the United States to lose 5.5 million jobs and the unemployment rate to soar to 7%. As The Economist said, Trump's Liberation Day is likely to be the Waterloo of the US economy. There is no winner in this tariff farce when the train of globalization is forcibly braked. Every passenger will face the risk of derailment, and Trump may have to listen to the echo of history. The last country that tried to reshape the world with tariffs eventually declined in economic ruins. The man who had been shouting the slogan of America First all day long finally took action on April 2nd, declaring a state of emergency in the United States and imposing tariffs on all countries and regions based on the principle of reciprocity, launching an unprecedented epic trade war. Trump's new round of tariffs